Hello, we are live. Woohoo. Hey, Judy. Are you there? I think you are. How's everybody doing this evening? Oh, gotta turn that around so I can see my chat. Okay. Tonight we are going to finish the book. Okay. We we will finish The Secret of Shadow Ranch. Anyway, so okay. Welcome to Nancy Drew Mystery Stories. I am Sharon Schultz, also known as the Bay Lady. Um, I'm the Bay Lady because mostly I do virtual tours that are out of doors, going to different places. The Chesapeake Bay area of Maryland, where I live, is an absolutely gorgeous place. And there's so many different things to do and see. So I like sharing. So that's where the Bay Lady comes in. But I also like other things like Beatles trivia, arts and crafts, and also books. So Nancy Drew, oh my goodness, was my favorite growing up. Um, the first time I went to the Brooklyn Public Library in Brooklyn, New York, I discovered Nancy Drew. Oh my goodness. I couldn't wait to get the next book and the next one and the next one. And I don't think I ever ran out. I've been a mystery lover ever since. I just really enjoy um, Nancy Drew in particular. So, the reason I started reading these books here as a virtual tour of sorts is because they were written at a period of time when things were much simpler and easier. Life was less complicated. The Secret of Shadow Ranch I had chosen to read because it's the first book in the long series of books that introduces Nancy Drew's friend, Bess Marvin, and let's see, Bess Marvin, oh, and George, little George, right? Anyway, uh, this book was written, just to give you an idea of the time frame that we're talking about. Where's that opening page? Here's somewhere. It's not. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this was originally written in, let's see, copyright 1931, Simon and Schuster. 1931, this was written. Yeah, it's almost 100 years ago. All right, so what we have here is The Secret of Shadow Ranch. And let me just read you the brief intro here because we're going to pick this up tonight where we left off, which is, looks like chapter 14, 15. Okay. So, The Secret of Shadow Ranch, here's the gist of it real quick. Nancy Drew arrives in Phoenix, Arizona, eagerly looking forward to a fun-filled vacation at Shadow Ranch, but abruptly finds herself involved in a baffling mystery. The ranch is being haunted by a phantom horse and maliciously damaged by an unknown enemy. Local people believe that the ghostly animal is carrying out the curse of Dirk Valentine, the romantic outlaw who was killed many years ago at Shadow Ranch, where he'd gone to fulfill a promise to his sweetheart. Suspecting that a treasure hidden by Valentine may be at the root of the Shadow Ranch mystery, Nancy undertakes a challenging search aided by her friends Bess Marvin and George Fain. The first vital clue is found in an antique watch and sparks a series of clever deductions and dangerous developments. While seeking further clues, the girls' investigation in a ghost town ends in near disaster when Nancy is trapped inside a building that is toppled by a rock slide. A rock slide which was deliberately caused. But the pretty detective remains undaunted in her determination to solve the mystery. For those who enjoy a suspenseful thriller, Nancy Drew's first Western adventure makes truly fascinating reading. All right, so we will take off here. Hang on 1 second while I get myself comfortably situated. All right. All right. Let me see. I don't think there are many chapters left, but we probably will go beyond the hour. Right? Okay, so this is okay, so this is chapter 14. Chapter 14, the nettle trick. Near the empty artist's chair, a man sat sketching. Nancy walked towards him. Pardon me, but do you know where the person is who drew that pastel? The man looked up from his work and pointed with his pencil. There's the one. Nancy turned and saw a stout woman in a blue dress coming towards them. Want to buy that pastel, girls? It's the last one. The rest sold like hotcakes. Alice's face showed keen disappointment. This isn't your work. The woman chuckled and sat down heavily. That's right, dearie. I can't even draw a cow. I'm a dealer. I buy from the artists and I sell their work. Well, where is the man who did this picture? Nancy pressed. That I don't know. He told me he was a stranger just visiting Phoenix. Seemed kind of closed-mouthed, didn't say where he came from and where he was staying. Alice asked, was he a slender, gray-haired man? Yeah, said his name was Bursey. Do you know him? We think so, Nancy replied. Alice looked longingly at the picture. How much is it? She asked the woman. When Alice heard the price, her face clouded. I haven't enough money to buy it. Exchanging quick glances, the other girls reached an agreement. That's all right, Alice, said Nancy. We'll make up the difference. When the picture was paid for, Alice took it gratefully. She thanked the girls as they walked away from the dealer, then added, Oh, Nancy, you've been so wonderful to me. Alice's eyes were misty with emotion. I feel that we must be getting closer to my father. She thought that he might have returned to the mountain cabin and begged Nancy to go back there with her. I wish I could, said Nancy, but it would be too late to make the trip today after we reach the ranch. Tell you what, though, I'll take you in the morning. George had another idea. There's just a chance our Uncle Ross Rager might be around this exhibition someplace. He might have come to see how his pictures are selling. The others agreed that George had a point, and for a while, the four girls strolled through the park, keeping their eyes open for the slender, gray-haired man. They did not see him. Near mid-afternoon, Nancy treated everyone to cool sodas from a passing vendor, and they sat on a bench to drink them. Bess glanced at her watch and suggested that they start for home. George drove. They crossed the desert without trouble and arrived at the ranch in time for supper. At the table, they learned that the telephone, lights, and water had been restored, but four of the palominos were still missing. The critters are up on Shadow Mountain somewhere, Bud remarked gloomily as he passed the biscuits to Nancy. We have our work cut out to track them. And we might as well face it, said Uncle Ed. They may be badly hurt. To lighten the conversation, Aunt Bet reminded everyone of the barbecue the next day. It's customary for us ranch folks to take a dessert. Any suggestions? Ted grinned. I sure do cotton to chocolate cake. Nancy makes scrumptious ones, said Bess. Then I guess she's elected, Mrs. Raleigh said with a smile. Nancy laughed. Thank you for the job, my friends. Now who's going to help? I will, chorused Dave, Tex, and Bud. Good, said Nancy. You boys can shell the walnuts for topping the icing. That is, if you have any, Mrs. Thurmond. We have plenty of everything, the cook declared. Just step right up and take hold. We'll all help, Bess said happily. Let's make it an extra big cake. After supper, the girls dried the dishes for Mrs. Thurmond. Then Nancy put all the cake ingredients on the big kitchen table. The cook gave her several large bowls. Tex grinned as he picked up a nutcracker. Boys, we hired out to punch cows, and here we're peeling nuts. While Nancy and her assistants worked, they talked about the phantom. Mrs. Thurmond listened intently. Where do you think the ghost horse is kept? Alice asked. Folks say Valentine had a hideout on Shadow Mountain, Mrs. Thurmond spoke up. And I figure that's where the critter stays now, same as it did in life. The girls tried to convince the cook that the apparition was a mere trick, but they couldn't do it. Nancy changed the subject. If Valentine did have a hideout in this area, very likely he kept his horse in a corral there. It's possible that the people who are attacking the ranch have discovered the place and are using it for their trick horse. Hang on a sec, my things. My brace is uncomfortable. It's too tight. There we go. Okay. Nancy changed the subject. If Valentine did have a hideout in this area, very likely he kept his horse in a corral there. It's possible that the persons who are attacking the ranch have discovered the place and are using it for their trick horse. Mrs. Thurmond shook her head gloomily. If it was real folks doing the damage, I'd face right up to them, she declared. But I've seen that spook with my own eyes. I tell you, it's too much for my nerves. By the time the baking was finished, Mrs. Thurmond had excused herself and gone to bed. Now for the icing, said Nancy. And when the cake was cool enough, she covered it with thick, creamy swirls of dark chocolate and studded the top with whole walnuts. Bess sighed. It's too bad we can't have just a teeny piece now, isn't it? I could sure go for a slab, Tux agreed hungrily. Come on, Cookie, Dave, coaxed Nancy. Think how good that would taste to us, poor riders out on the midnight watch, Bud said in his soft drawl. Saddle sore weary, you're breaking our hearts, George said cheerfully. Graham crackers and milk tonight, Nancy announced with a chuckle. You'll get your cake tomorrow. In the morning, Alice could hardly contain her excitement over the trip to the cabin. Not wanting their destination known, Nancy had warned Alice to say nothing of her hopes at the breakfast table. When Aunt Bet asked the girls about their plans, Nancy said Alice and I would like to go for a ride in the mountains. George had letters to write, and Bess said she intended to wash and set her hair. I'll saddle up for you, Shorty volunteered. Nancy was surprised at his friendly gesture. She and Alice thanked him, then hurried to change into riding clothes. When they were dressed and waiting on the porch, Tex walked up, leading Nancy's bag. Just behind him came Shorty with a sorrel for Alice. Nancy stepped into the yard and mounted easily. With a shrill whinny, the horse reared. Hang on, Tex shouted. Nancy gripped it tight and hung on to the reins. The horse pitched high and landed stiff-legged on all fours. Tex seized the bridle and held the bay down, giving Nancy time to fling herself from the saddle. Hey, boy, easy now, Tex said as he tried to calm the excited animal. Nancy, are you hurt? Alice asked worriedly. I'm all right, Nancy replied breathlessly, but what's the matter with the horse? Shorty had hurried to Tex's assistance, and now the snorting steed was standing still. The red-haired cowboy's eyes narrowed with suspicion as he loosened the saddle girth and reached up under the blanket. I thought so. He brought out his hand and held it open for others to see. In his palm lay a nettle. Shorty's eyes grew wide. Well, what do you know about that? He drawled. Tex looked at him levelly. What do you know about this? Me, exclaimed Shorty. Some mean coyote pulled that trick, not me. You saddled the animals, Tex retorted and turned to Nancy. I was passing the stable when Shorty came out with these mounts. He asked me to bring this one over to you. Now, hold on there a minute, Shorty put in. When I went to the stable after breakfast, I found this bay already saddled. I throwed the saddle on the other one and brung him out. That's all I know about it. You got no call to accuse me. No, sir, not me. Tex's face flushed with anger. If you're telling the truth, sorry, Steele. I apologize. Before the stocky cowboy could answer, Nancy suggested that Tex check Alice's saddle blanket. He did and reported that it was all right. The girls mounted and rode towards the meadow. I don't believe Shorty was telling the truth, said Alice. Nancy said nothing, but she was inclined to agree. Aloud, she said, someone has not given up trying to get me out of the picture. When they finally sighted the cabin, Nancy reined up behind the clump of big boulders. She swung from the saddle and ground hitched her horse, but was not so quick as Alice. The younger girl dashed to the cabin and knocked on the door. As Nancy ran up, it was opened by a slender gray-haired man. With a shock, Nancy recognized him. He was the one who had put the snake's rattle into her knitting bag and dropped the warning note into the car. Chapter 15. Alice was on the verge of tears. The man in the cabin doorway was not her father. He scowled at the two girls. "What do you want?" Nancy was sure the man must have recognized her, but he gave no sign of it, so she pretended not to know him. Quickly, she thought of an excuse for coming. "Are you Mr. Bernsey?" she asked. "Yes, why?" "We'd like to buy one of your pastels," Nancy replied. "My what?" "Pastels. Your pictures," Nancy said. "Oh," the man paused. "I haven't any more." "How did you know I was here?" Nancy explained casually that Mary Dear had told them the artist lived on the mountain. "Several days ago, we happened to see this cabin, and we thought perhaps it might be where you live." He gave Nancy a long, hard look. "My paintings are all gone," he said. "No use coming back." Nancy apologized for bothering him, and as the girls turned to walk back to their horses, he closed the door. Alice was deeply upset. "I just can't believe that man drew those pictures." "I'm sure he didn't," Nancy replied as the girls mounted. "He's no artist. He didn't know what I meant by pastels, and he called the pictures paintings. He should have known they're drawings made with special crayons." She told Alice how she, Bess, and George had encountered the man before. Alex was excited. "Maybe he's holding my father prisoner somewhere." Nancy agreed that it was possible. But where, she wondered. There had been no one else in the one-room cabin. Recalling how Chief had appeared mysteriously from behind it, Nancy surmised there was a hiding place nearby. "What shall we do, Nancy?" Alice asked. "Report to the sheriff as fast as we can." Nancy added that if Alice's father was a prisoner of Bursey, the gray-haired man and his pals might very well be the Chicago bank robbers. And since Bursey is also mixed up with the ranch trouble, his gang is probably responsible for the phantom horse. As the girls ran down the trail, Nancy's thoughts dwelt uneasily on the man who said his name was Bursey. Could he possibly believe she had not known him? "I'm afraid my trumped-up story didn't fool him," she decided. "He must know I'll report him to Sheriff Curtis, but why didn't he try to stop me?" The answer was plain. The man believed that people knew the girl's destination. "He didn't want us to disappear at his cabin," Nancy told herself, "so he'll arrange an accident for one of us on the way down the mountain." She turned in her saddle and warned Alice to keep alert for signs of pursuit. A little further along, they came to a fork in the trail. "Let's follow this other path," Nancy suggested. Soon they found the new route a hazardous one, however, and were forced to slow down. The horses were picking their footing on the narrow trail, which wound back and forth across a sheer cliff. Alice glanced up. "Uncle Ed says that the Westerners call this kind of path an eyebrow trail." "I can see why." A few minutes later, the girls rode under a rock overhang, which prevented them from seeing the turn off the path above them. Suddenly, pebbles and dust started falling from above. Someone was following them. Nancy signaled to Alice, who nodded her understanding. The riders sat in tense silence as their horses slowly proceeded to the bottom of the cliff, where the trail became less steep. But it was narrow and precarious. The girls urged their horses to go as fast as they dared. Soon they heard the clatter of a horse's hoofs behind them. Nancy knew they had no defense against the surprise attack she was fearing was coming. It would take only a few boulders rolling from above to spook the horses and cause the accident. Nancy looked ahead for shelter. Some distance below, the trail disappeared among high rocks. If we can reach that spot before our enemy strikes, she thought, we may have a chance. Again, the girls urged their mounts on and rode desperately towards the screen of rocks. Jolting hard, Alice clung to the middle horn all the way. We made it, she gasped as they rounded a curve and were hidden between the large boulders which lay on either side. Swiftly, Nancy dismounted, signaling her companion to do the same. The young girl followed the rocks. Nancy led her horse into a cluster of giant rocks. Alice held her mount firmly and kept one hand soothingly upon his nose. If only the animals would stand quietly. One jangle of the bridle or a hoof scuffing a stone, and their hiding place would be revealed. Hardly breathing, the girls heard the clatter of stones as their pursuer approached. The sounds came closer, then suddenly stopped. He sees we're not on the trail ahead, Nancy thought. Would the rider figure that they had rounded the next curve but were hiding? For a long moment, there was silence from the other end of the boulders. He's listening, Nancy thought. The girl stood frozen. Then came the creak of a saddle and the sound of horses as the rider moved on. Nancy and Alice gave sighs of relief, and after waiting a few minutes, led their horses out of the boulders. Quickly, the two remounted. Alice said fearfully, when he reaches open mountainside again, he'll see that he has missed us and will come back. We'll meet him head on. I know, Nancy replied. We must look for another branching trail. Presently, she spotted a side path along the boulders, and the girls guided their horses onto it. The way downward was narrow and rough, but the two riders were sheltered first by the rocks, then tall fir and tamarack trees. They reached the valley a mile from where the other trail came down. Oh, take a break here. Anybody want to stretch? Hello, Robert. Oops, that was crazy. Never mind. Okay. We made it safely, cried Alice in relief. Oh, Nancy, how can I ever thank you? Her companion smiled. Don't think I wasn't scared. It was noon when the girls dismounted at the stable. They hurried to the living room where they found the Raleighs chatting with Bess and George. While Alex excitedly reported all that had happened to them, Nancy telephoned the sheriff. She told him her suspicions of the man calling himself Bursey, and also the possibility that Ross Rieger, Alice's father, was being held prisoner on the mountain by the same gang responsible for the phantom horse trick. Sheriff Curtis said, I'll go up to the cabin at once with 2 men and arrest this hombre, Bursey, and his confederates. Nancy hastened back to the living room and reported the conversation. That's great, exclaimed George. If the sheriff catches the bank robbers, it will mean the end of the damage on the ranch. But they must have another outpost where they keep Uncle Ross, Bess objected, and we don't know where that is. Besides, the sheriff may only find Bursey. But if he talks, we'll get to the bottom of the mystery, Nancy reminded her. Suddenly, the door to the patio burst open and Dave came in. Mr. Raleigh, we found the missing horses. Amid the girls' exclamation of joy, the rancher beamed and asked, where are they now? Tex, Bud, and I put them in the meadow. We found them up on Shadow Mountain, grazing by a creek, Dave hesitated. The only thing is they're hurt. Mr. Rawlings' jaw tightened. Bad? 3 of them are wire cut and the mare is limping. We'd better call the vet. The rancher agreed and Dave hurried to the telephone. Could be worse, Uncle Ed said. Maybe everything will be all right provided there's no more change or damage. Aunt Bet smiled cheerfully. Nothing more is likely to happen. After all, the sheriff is on his way to round up the gang, thanks to Nancy. In a happy frame of mind, the girls hurried away to dress in their squaw outfits before lunch. When she showered, Nancy's thoughts were on the treasure. Where could the outlaw have hidden it? Still puzzling, Nancy slipped into her blue costume. She brushed her hair until it gleamed, then put on a pair of small silver earrings and added a touch of lipstick. The other girls were not ready yet, so Nancy went into the living room to wait for them. As she seated herself in one of the rockers, her an Indian grinding stone caught her attention. She recalled what Aunt Bet had told her about it and about the other stones. Suddenly, her eyes lit up with an idea and she jumped forward in excitement. Bess, George, Alice, she called, running to the door. What is it? Asked George as the 3 girls came hurrying down the hall. Nancy's eyes sparkled with excitement. I think I know where the treasure is. Ooh, Nancy thinks she knows. Okay, chapter 16. The sheriff's quarry. A burst of excited questions met Nancy's announcement. She chuckled, and George said, "Quiet, everybody. Now tell us where the treasure is." Nancy led her friends into the living room. She shut the door and announced, "In the cliff houses down the valley." "They're certainly the oldest dwellings around here," said George, "but they're not on the ranch." "They were when Valentine wrote his letter." "Nancy, how do you know?" Alice asked. "Because Aunt Bet told us that every stone in this fireplace came from somewhere on the ranch. It stands to reason that the Indian grinding stone came from the cliff dwelling." She reminded the girls that Sheriff Humber had been obliged to sell that part of his property after Valentine's death. It's natural that he would get rid of the outlying section first. "Nancy," declared George, "that's a great piece of deduction." Just then, the triangle changed for lunch. As the girls hurried to the kitchen, Nancy requested them to keep her theory a secret. "We won't be able to check it before tomorrow, and we don't want anyone else to get there before us." As the group hurried into the kitchen, they stared in amazement. Mrs. Thurmond ladling out stew as the stove was ladling out. Hold on. Mrs. Thurmond, ladling out stew at the stove, was wearing her big white apron as usual, and on her head was perched a black straw hat bedecked with artificial roses. Instead of being amused, the cowboys stood about looking uncomfortable, and Aunt Bet's face was strained. "I'm leaving," announced the cook, without turning from her work. "I fixed my last dinner in this place. As soon as it's over, I'm riding into Tumbleweed with you young folks and taking the 3 o'clock bus for Phoenix." Mr. Rowley said soothingly, "Things here have been pretty rough around here, Mrs. Thurman, but we think they'll be getting better pretty soon." Mrs. Thurman faced the rancher squarely. "Mr. Raleigh, I can take rough times with the best of them, but phantom horses, that's too much for me." She picked up the big bowl of stew and walked towards the table. Aunt Bet followed her, pleading, "Mrs. Thurman, please reconsider, please." "Nope," said the woman, and sat on the bench down for a nap. Sat down on the bench with a thump. Okay. Stretching. Yeah. Yes, indeed. I'm all nice and comfy. Yes, indeed I am. Okay. Let's see. Cook left. Where are we? Nancy knew that the loss of the cook would be an added hardship for Aunt Bet, who not only had ranch house duties, but was needed to help her husband. The new crisis threw a pall over the meal, as the appearance of a magnificent lemon meringue pie. The gloom became even deeper, for it seemed likely to be the last time any of the diners would taste Mrs. Thurman's fine baking. When the dessert was gone, the men pushed back their chairs and rose. Immediately, the cook asked Dave what time he would be driving the ranch wagon to Tumblewood. Before he could answer, Nancy spoke up. Not for a half an hour yet, are you, Dave? He caught the urgent message in her eyes and nodded. I'll honk the horn when I'm ready to go, he promised. As soon as the men had left the kitchen, the girls and Aunt Bee gathered around Mrs. Thurmond and pleaded with her to remain. The little woman shook her head regretfully, but steadfastly refused. That phantom has me scared out of my skin, she declared. If I could prove to you that the phantom is a real horse, Mrs. Thurmond, would you stay? Nancy asked. Of course I would. I'm not afraid of a live critter. Then just let me have a little time. I feel sure I'll be able to show you how the trick is done. The others chimed in, cajoling the cook to give Nancy a chance. Bess added, I don't know how we'll get along without you and all those wonderful pies. Mrs. Thurman considered a moment. All right, one more night. At their delighted thanks, she flushed with pleasure and marched off to remove her hat. When she returned, the girls and Aunt Bet helped her clear the table. Before long, the horn of the ranch wagon sounded and Nancy left with her friends. Dave, Tex, and Bud were in the yard talking to Uncle Ed. Bud was holding a guitar in a case. A short distance away, Shorty lounged against the horse trailer where he had been hitched to the back of the ranch wagon. As the girls came up, they heard Uncle Ed say, You go ahead, boys, and have a good time. You've earned a holiday. You might need some help with those palimonies when the wet comes, said Dave. He glanced uneasily at Nancy, and she understood at once how he felt. I'll be glad to excuse you, Dave, if you feel you ought to stay, she said. No, that's not necessary, Ed Brawley said. As Dave thanked him, Nancy noticed Tex talking quietly to Alice. Flushed with excitement, she smiled happily and hurried to Nancy's side. Tex's brother Jack is going to be in the photo, and Tex says Jack would like to take me to the barbecue and dance. He's 15. Jack, is it all right, Uncle Ed? She asked, blushing. The rancher nodded and chuckled. I've met the young man. Go ahead. As Alice went back to tell Tori, Nancy and George's findings looked knowingly. Tex, Nancy, and George looked knowingly at Bess, who dimpled. Now, how did you fix that face, Miss Cooper? It was easy, Bess replied. I remembered Tex mentioned his brother was coming into Tumbleweed for the photo. Come on, cried Tex. Let's roll. The others hastened to the ranch wagon. Bud, carrying his guitar, climbed in the back of the wagon, and Stacy joined him. Tex, George, and Beth sat in the middle, while Nancy and Alice took the seats next to Dave, who was at the wheel. "I've never been to a rodeo," Alice said as they started out. "What's it like?" Dave grinned. Tex grinned. "Well, Dave here is going to flip some fancy loops, and so's Bud." Fancy loops sounds like a bit of a rodeo to me. I think we have 2 or 3 more chapters here, so we're doing pretty good, right? "He means they're going to rope cows," said Beth. "Steers," Tex corrected. Beth asked Tex what he was going to do. "Dog a steer," was his reply. Dave chuckled at Alice's puzzled look. "He'll ride his horse alongside a running steer and leap aboard. Then he'll bite the dust," Bud teased. "Not Tex," Dave rejoined. "He's a real salty bulldogger. And Shorty there is a bronco buster," Tex added. "And I'm fixing to win too," Shorty declared. "Wouldn't be the first time." He went on to brag about several occasions when he had won prizes in rodeos. When he talked, Nancy was quiet, thinking about the phantom horse. "Oh, how I wish Chief could talk," she said to herself. "He's been closer to it than anyone." She wondered again why the big dog had been held prisoner. Suddenly, Nancy thought of the light she had seen in the spring house shortly before the ghost horse had appeared. With a thrill of excitement, Nancy suddenly figured out how the trick could have been done. It was all she could do to keep from examining ahead. She decided to say nothing to the other girls until she had an opportunity to prove her theory. "And I can't do that until after dark," she thought. When they reached Tumbleweed, Dave drove slowly through the streets crowded with visitors. Many of the men had on fringed buckskin jackets, and some of the women wore long pioneer dresses with sunbonnets. Others wore graceful squaw dresses. Suddenly, Nancy spotted a jabbily dressed, gray-haired man standing in the doorway of a store. The man, who called himself Bursey. At that moment, his eyes met hers, and he darted away in the crowd. Nancy's heart sank. The sheriff, who was on his way to or from the cabin, had missed his quarry. Nancy wondered what to do. Get word to the authorities? David interrupted her thoughts by saying that the rodeo would not start for an hour. "We have to go and check in," he said. What do you girls want to do in the meantime?" "Oh, we'll keep busy," Nancy replied. When the cowboys had left, she suggested that Bess take Alice and hunt for Bursey. She and George would go in another direction. "Let's meet at Mary Deer's shop." They all arrived half an hour later. There had been no trace of the man. He probably left town in a hurry, George declared. The store was crowded, and Mary Dear had an assistant working behind the counter. While the other girls looked at jewelry, Nancy beckoned her Indian friend aside and asked if she would keep a secret. When Mary promised, Nancy told her that she hoped to find the treasure in the cliff dwellings and inquired the best way to get to them. There are stairs up the front, said Mary, but they're not safe. You had best come down from above. She explained that at the far end of the cliff apartments, there was a huge slab of rock which had been used as a lookout point by the ancient Indians. Stairs led from the rock down to the top of dwellings. Nancy thanked Mary and promised to let her know if she discovered anything. By the time the other girls had bought Indian jewelry, and after Nancy had purchased a turquoise pillbox for Hannah, they left the shop. The foursome followed the arrows to the far end of town, where they found the rodeo arena. A short distance from the stockyard, Nancy bought tickets at the front gate, and they all found seats in the stands. I'm so hot, I'd like to have a cold drink, and I think I need a hot dog to go with it. George grinned. Eating is really a very fattening hobby, dear cousin. Before Bess could retort, a voice came from the loudspeaker. Telephone call for Miss Nancy Drew in the booth next to the refreshment stand. The girls looked at one another in amazement. Afraid that something had gone wrong at the ranch, Nancy excused herself and hurried off. She made her way through the crowd to the first telephone booth beside the hot dog stand. As she reached it, the door opened and Bursey stepped out with a grin. At the same time, a tall figure in black glided to her side. Mr. Diamond. Bursey's strong fingers closed on Nancy's wrist. You're coming with us, he growled. And don't yell or you'll be sorry. Okay, that ends another chapter. So now we're about to go for chapter 17, an interrupted program. But hold on 1 second while I interrupt myself just for a minute. Don't go away. Okay. I just need to make myself more cozy here as I read. Ah, there we go. That's nice. It's a little chilly there. All right. Okay, so this is an interrupted program, the name of this chapter. Before Nancy could say anything to the two men, Bess's voice rang out. She is not going with you. Let her go, George ordered. As Bursley whirled in surprise, Nancy jerked her wrist from his grasp. Diamond's startled look changed to a scowl, and the two ran away fast, disappearing under the grandstand. Girls, you were wonderful, Nancy exclaimed, recovering from her shock. But those men must be caught. The three friends dashed after the fugitives, all the while looking for a deputy, but saw none. Finally, they gave up the chase. Two men had vanished. I'll go to the sheriff's office and report this, Nancy said. Not alone, George declared. We're all sticking to you for the rest of the afternoon. It's a good thing I let Bess talk me into coming down for a hot dog. Bess thought she'd better go back to Alice, who was holding their seats in the grandstand. George accompanied Nancy to Sheriff Curtis's office, where the young sleuth left a note for the absent lawmen from the kidnapping attempt. When they returned to the rodeo arena, they heard a burst of cheering. Dave just won the roping contest, cried Alice, as Nancy and George took their seats. The delighted girls clapped loudly. Bud was good too, Bess put in loyally, as Dave walked to the judges' stand. Modestly, he accepted the first prize, a pair of silver spurs, and left the arena to another burst of applause. Next came the Bronco Busters. The girls watched thrilled as one after another of the contestants hurled into the arena on the bucking horses. Shorty came last. Shrill whistles filled the air as he tried to stick in the saddle for the required number of minutes. Oh my goodness. Hang on a second, please. There we go. Blanket keeps falling off my feet, which is what was cold in the first place. There we go. I didn't open it up as fine. Okay, now we're good, I guess. Okay. Bess thought she'd better go back to Alice, who was holding their seats in the grandstand. George accompanied Nancy to Sheriff Curtis's office, where they left a message. When they returned to the rodeo arena, they heard a burst of cheering. Dave just won the roping contest. Bud was good too, Bess put in loyally, as Dave walked to the judges' stand. Modestly, he accepted the first prize, a pair of silver spurs, and left the arena to another burst of applause. Shorty came last. Shrill whistle filled the air as he tried to stick in the saddle for the required number of minutes. Look at I'm Sunfish, came a shout from the stands as the frantic horse pitched high into the air, his back arched. Suddenly a shot rang out from the judges' stand. Time's up. Shorty won, George exclaimed. The stands erupted into cheers. At the same time, the bronco shook his rider loose. The winner rolled over in the dust, picked himself up, retrieved his hat, and waved it at the spectators. As the bronc was shunted out of the area by attendants, Shorty strode to the judges' stand. He claimed his prize, a silver buckle, and held it up for all to see. Then he swaggered out of the arena. After the rodeo, the girls met their dates coming outside the front gate. Tex introduced his brother Jack, the tall, freckle-faced boy whose friendly manner immediately put Alice at ease. Quickly, Nancy warned the boys about Bernsey and Diamond. Dave looked worried, and Jack spoke up. I don't know what this is all about, but no one will get Alice away from me until I turn her over to Nancy after the dance. Nancy and Dave led the way to the ranch wagon. Shorty said he'd come along later, he remarked. On the drive to the barbecue grounds, Nancy quietly told him her deduction about the treasure. Dave was excited and said he hoped that she was right. About a mile beyond Tumbleweed, he parked in a grove of willow trees beside a narrow stream. The grounds were set with many long wooden tables and benches, and overhead were strings of small electric lights. Reminds me of the cafe lights we have today. Come on, gal, said Tex. We're gonna put on a big feed. He led them toward a long serving table. 4 men passed by, each carrying a shovel, bearing a big burlap wrapped package. They were dumped onto the table. There goes the meat, said Bud. It's been buried in the barbecue pit since last night. Cooking nice and slow over hot stones, Tex added. When the burlap fell away, the fragrance of the steaming meat was irresistible. All the girls enjoyed generous servings with a spicy relish and potato salad. By the time they'd finished their desserts of ice cream and Nancy's chocolate cake, the colored lights overhead came on. A stout middle-aged man mounted the dance platform in the center of the grove and announced that he was master of ceremonies. Seeing Bud's guitar, he called on him for some cowboy songs. Bud played I'm a Lonesome Cowboy, and everyone joined in enthusiastically. He followed with a number of other old favorites. Finally, he strummed some Gold Rush songs, including Sweet Betsy from the Pike. The cheers and applause had not yet died down when Shorty appeared on the platform. Ignoring the master of ceremonies, he leaned toward the microphone and said, Folks, how would you like me to do my imitations? Let's see here. Okay. I think there's just a couple of chapters, a couple of pages. Okay. At the scattered hand clapping and whistles, the stout man nodded and stepped back. Shorty cupped his hands around his mouth, closed his eyes, and the long, mournful hoot of an owl filled the night. He's really good, Bess whispered. I'll bet he can also do a whining dog, Nancy said meaningfully. Next, the cowboy announced a coyote and produced several realistic howls. Suddenly, in mid-howl, he spotted Nancy in the audience. His jaw dropped, and he stood silent before the microphone. Staring at her, he stammered that his act was over and left the platform. The girls exchanged baffled glances. Dave grinned. That was one surprise coyote, all right. He thought his pals had got rid of you, Nancy. Just then, a band of three musicians began tuning up, and a square dancing contest was announced. Alice suggested that the four couples enter as a set, and the others agreed enthusiastically. Of the four groups in the contest, Nancy's was called first. The young people lined up on the platform, facing each other in couples. At the sound of the lively music, they began to dance. The fiddle player called the steps and played his tunes fast. Swing your partner in a do-si-do. Whirling past the edge of the platform, Nancy glimpsed Shorty glowering at her. When the breathless dancers returned to their table, Nancy told the others of the incident. It's going to be hard to shake Shorty from us now. I'm afraid he and his pals will watch us so closely we'll have no chance to go after the treasure. While the other sets of dancers competed, Nancy pondered on how to make sure the girls were not followed to the cliff houses. At the end of the contest, the crowd voted by applause, and the Shadow Ranch group won easily. Nancy was sent to the platform to claim the prize. The master of ceremonies handed her a pink slip of paper. You take this to the food table over yonder, young lady, and they'll give you and your friends a big ice cold watermelon. That sounds good right about now. Okay. Nancy thanked the man, then turned to the audience and said, I would like to make an announcement that I believe will interest everybody in this area. My friends and I think we know where the famous long lost Valentine treasure is hidden. An excited rustle ran through the crowd and cries of, Where? Where? Nancy smiled. I won't say anything more about it now, but tomorrow a few Shadow Ranch men are going out to do some digging. As Nancy hurried from the platform, she saw Sheriff Curtis making his way towards her. He spoke of his futile search on the mountain, and his regret that the desperados were still at large. I'm glad you outwitted them this afternoon, but watch your step. Then he joined the young people at their table. George asked Nancy, what was the meaning of that announcement you made? In a low voice, the young sleuth said, Everybody look happy, not as if we're talking about anything important, and I'll explain. Dave obligingly gave a broad grin. I'll collect our prize. He soon returned and began cutting and serving the watermelon. Meanwhile, the others listened, smiling and laughing, as Nancy told them that the Shadow Ranch cowboys were to act as decoys while the girls went to the cliff dwellings to search for the treasure. Shorty will no doubt alert Bernsey and Diamond, and they'll be keeping an eye on the ranch. Sheriff Curtis praised Nancy for her plan and said he would follow the decoy group. I'll nab the varmints when they move against the cowboys. His blue eyes were sober as he said, I can see you're a capable girl, Miss Drew, but you got to be extra careful from now on, 'cause those thieving, homeless hombres want to keep all of you tenderfeet quiet. We'll stay close to the girls, Dave promised, and the cowboys permitted no one to cut in during the dancing that followed. When the party was over, Jack said goodnight to Alice at the ranch wagon and promised to telephone her soon. As Nancy and her friends climbed into the car, Shorty came hurrying up to join them. Dave drove down to the corrals behind the arena where Tex and Bud picked up the horses and trailer. Shorty got out too and walked into a phone booth at the edge of the parking arena. He didn't stay long. I'll bet he called Diamond and Bernie to tell them what I did, Nancy declared. As Dave started the drive home, Shorty questioned Nancy about her announcement. She laughed and replied that he would see later what she meant. Before he could ask any more questions, Bud struck a chord on his guitar and started a cowboy song. Shorty gave up talking and sat suddenly while the others sang all during the ride. Although she joined in the songs, Nancy's thoughts dwelled on the plan she had made for proving to Mrs. Thurman that the phantom horse was a trick. She was pleased to note that the moon had gone behind heavy clouds and the night was very dark. When they reached the ranch, the cowboys hurried off to relieve Ed Rowley and the freshmen who had done guard duty during their absence. The girls went to the house where they found Mrs. Raleigh in the lighted living room. Chief lay by the fireplace. I felt safer with him in here, Aunt Bet explained. Nancy asked the others to accompany her to the kitchen. There, they found Mrs. Thurman seated in a big chair reading a magazine. I believe I can show you how the phantom was made to appear, Nancy said. The cook looked skeptical, then exclaimed nervously as Nancy turned out the lights. With a mysterious smile, she slipped outside and hurried down the patio. As soon she returned, all set, looked through the screen door. Her friends compiled and stared into the darkness. Suddenly, Mrs. Thurman gave a scream and Mrs. Rowley gasped. Bobbing toward them about 3 feet above the patio were tiny glowing specks. Oh, moaned the cook. Phantom spots. Take them away. Nancy opened the door and the shining specks floated into the room. Okay, I just want to see here. Okay, 3 more chapters. How are we doing with time? Okay, so this will probably take us another 15 minutes, I guess, right? Okay, the Black Phantom. As the watchers stared amazed, the glowing speck stopped floating forward and hung in the darkness. Oh, Mrs. Thurman quavered. They shine just like the ghost horse. Nancy switched on the light. Before them stood Chief, a large rubber ball clutched in his jaws. Smiling at the flabbergasted onlookers, Nancy said, "Do you see how the phantom trick was worked?" "I do," George said promptly. "Phosphorescent paint on the dog's teeth." "Where are the specks now?" Mrs. Thurman Chief asked as Chief dropped the ball. "They don't show when lights are on. At the time Chief disappeared after he chased the phantom horse, the spots were on his bench," the young sleuth explained. "I thought perhaps he had bitten the ghost, but when I examined him in the daylight, I found no evidence." "The gang must have washed him," remarked Bess. "But they never thought of his teeth," Nancy said, "and fragments of the paint remained." "How did you get onto the idea?" Aunt Bet asked. Nancy reminded the others of her suspicion that Chief had been muzzled and taken away because the gang feared there was a clue to the apparition on him. "I learned in chemistry class that phosphorescent paint glows in the dark after it first has been exposed to light. I remembered that each time I'd seen the phantom horse there had been a light in the spring house. Just now, I put two and two together and decided that the apparition was a real horse. He was covered with a soft thin material which had been coated with phosphorescent paint and exposed to light in the spring house by some of the gang members." Mrs. Thurman drew a soft batch. Mrs. Thurman drew a soft breath and turned to Nancy. "You're a downright marvel. That's what you are, young lady." Nancy blushed. "You'll stay now, won't you?" And the others all added their pleas as well. "Course I will," Mrs. Thurman declared stoutly. You just show me the varmint that's been doing this no good trick, and I'll give him a piece of my mind." Before going to bed, Nancy told Aunt Bet and Uncle Ed of her plan for the following day. The rancher assured her he would cooperate. At breakfast, the girls talked lightheartedly of their all-day horseback ride. "Where are you gals fixing to go?" Shorty asked. "We'll start up Shadow Mountain," Nancy replied vaguely. "After that, we'll see." Mr. Raleigh broke in to appoint Tex and Bud as his helpers on the treasure expedition. When the meal was over, Nancy took Drew aside and told him that she and the other girls found Valentine's hoard. They would light a fire on the Lookout Rock. "Good," he replied. "Then I'll drive down the valley in the crack and climb up to the cliff houses by the front steps to help you bring the treasure back to the ranch." Half-hour later, Uncle Ed, Tex, and Bud saddled up for their trip. Shortly hung around eager to be there. You need okay. Mm. What's the second animal for? Asked Saunders, who had been told the secret. The rancher owner grinned. For the treasure. The trio headed down the valley away from Tumbleweed. Where are we at? Okay. Shorty watched them for a minute, then hurried into the woods behind the ranch house. Strolling toward the stable, Nancy suspected that Bernsey and Diamond were hiding among the trees, waiting to see which way the treasure party had gone. In the tack room, Dave helped Nancy pack small digging tools into a saddlebag and roll a spade in a blanket. The cowboy then saddled the girls' horses and hung the gear aboard two of them. Mrs. Thurman brought lunches, which Dave added to a pack as Nancy called to her companions that everything was ready. But it's in the opposite direction from the cliff dwellings, Alice whispered. That's the idea, Nancy replied, just in case Shorty suspects a trick and decides to follow us. Nancy pulled out a stub of a pencil and drew a map on the back of an envelope. It showed a trail going east across the mountains to the cliff dwellings. 20 minutes later, the girls were heading up Shadow Mountain. As they jogged along the trail, Nancy studied the map and noted that Dave's route began not far from the cabin. We can go there first, she said. If the gang is on a wild goose chase, now would be a good time to search for their hiding place. Though the girls were eager to go on with their real purpose, they spent the morning wandering over various trails. If anyone is following us, I hope he'll think we're just out for pleasure and give up the chase, Nancy remarked. In early afternoon, they stopped beside a stream to eat their lunch and then rode straight for the cabin. After half an hour, however, they were brought up short by huge boulders on the path. A rock fall, George exclaimed. We'll have to detour. The riders band the riders backtracked, then crossed a steep, stony slope so treacherous that they were forced to dismount and lead their horses slowly. Finally, they reached Clear Trail again. It was mid-afternoon when Alex cried out, There's the cabins. I see the roof. The foursome rode up the slope and ground hitched their horses. Cautiously, they made their way towards the cabin. The door was open and no one was inside. Nancy led the way behind the cabin and noticed again how close the back window was to the brush screen and rock wall. What a funny place to put a window, Bess remarked. Yes, that's one of the reasons I feel sure a hiding place is back here somewhere, Nancy exclaimed. Nope, Nancy replied. I think the window was used as an escape exit from the cabin. The girl examined the close growing chaparral. A few feet to the side of the window, George discovered a break in the thorny bush. Nancy slipped into it, and one by one, the girls struggled through and entered a narrow cleft in the rock wall. A few yards inside the opening, Nancy pointed out horseshoe paw and shoe prints. Let's follow the print, she suggested. I have a bunch of these right next to me in Valentine's hideout. The girls hurried to their mounts and soon were riding through the narrow pass with only a strip of blue sky visible above them. After a while, the event was widely attended by everybody. It's the first time all the world leaders showed up in the same room for something that was not a problem with politics. By the time the riders saw daylight again, okay. So, all right. I think the window was used as an escape exit from the cabin. The girls examined the close growing chaparral. A few feet to the side of the window, George discovered a break in the thorny bush. Nancy slipped into it, and one by one, the girls struggled through and entered a narrow cleft in the rock wall. A few yards inside the opening, Nancy pointed out horseshoe paw and shoe prints. Let's follow the print, she suggested. I have a hunch this path might lead us to Valentine's hideout. The girls hurried to their mounts and were riding through the narrow pass with only a strip of blue sky visible above them. After a while, even that was blotted out by the overhang. The path grew gloomy and wound sharply around jagged outcrops. By the time the riders saw daylight again, the sun was low in the sky. They rode up a gentle slope and found themselves on a high plateau. Some distance ahead was a long, straight, rocky parapet about 12 feet high. Nancy reined up sharply. Look, she cried out. Built against the wall was a three-sided stone enclosure with an old wooden gate. Inside pranced a handsome black stallion. The phantom horse, Nancy exclaimed. As the four riders approached, the animal whinnied and reared, backing toward a crude lean-to stable. Maybe the trick trappings are in there, George said. Nancy dismounted quickly, opened a wooden gate, and slipped into the enclosure. The black steed nickered nervously and shied away, but Nancy talked soothingly to him as she walked forward. There was a pile of hay in the corner of the stable. Nancy felt under it. In a few moments, her fingers encountered something soft, and she pulled out a bundle of white material. She carried it outside and closed the gate behind her. The phantom costume, Bess exclaimed as Nancy shook out the filmy cloth. It's Japan silk, a very thin material used for theatrical effects, Nancy told the girls. She tucked the cloth into her saddlebag. This stable looks old, Bess remarked. I don't think the gang built it. You're right, Alice exclaimed and pointed to a barely discernible heart scratched on a gate. Then Valentine's hideout must be near here, Nancy said. As the girls looked around, Nancy noticed a huge rock jutting from the far end of the parapet. With a thrill of excitement, she recognized the lookout point. We're on top of the cliff houses. Let's get the wood ready for the fire, then start searching for the treasure. Beyond the lookout rock, the girls could see a grove of trees. They rode over and tethered their horses. The wind moaned through the fir trees, and Nancy shivered. She took her sweater from the saddlebag and threw it over her shoulders. It was nearly dusk, so the girls hung flashlights on their belts. Then they collected wood for the signal fire and carried it to the lookout rock just as the sun set. Nancy was the last to make her way off the rock. To one side of it was a short flight of worn steps going down to the top row of cliff apartments. Nancy was about to lead the descent when they heard the howl of a coyote. She stopped short. What's the matter? Asked Alice. Shh, listen. Everyone froze. I hope that's a real coyote, said Nancy. Beth gasped. You mean, Shorty, if the gang has discovered our ruse, they may have backtracked and traced us here, George said. Nancy nodded. We'd better not turn our lights on. Hugging the parapet, the girls went down these steps to the narrow walk which ran in front of the apartments. To their left was a sheer drop-off. For a moment, they stood still, breathless at the height and the silence. Suddenly, there came a thump from the first room. Bess grabbed George's arm, and Alice gasped. Quietly, Nancy stepped into the open doorway and peered into the gloom. A man was lying on the floor. The Cliff's Secret, Chapter 19. Help, called a feeble voice as Nancy shone her flashlight into the dim room. Daddy, cried Alice and pushed past Nancy. She threw herself beside a thin, gray-haired man who was bound hand and foot. Uncle Ross, exclaimed Bess and George. The older girl swiftly untied his bonds. Crying for joy, Alice helped her father sit up, and the two embraced. After introductions, Mr. Rieger explained that he had made the thumping noise by kicking his heels. My throat was so parched I couldn't yell out to you. Then Alice's father told his story. I've been a prisoner in the cabin for 6 months, ever since they kidnapped me at the time of the bank robbery. But this morning, the gang intended to go after the Raleigh treasure party. So they moved me here where they thought I wouldn't be discovered. Why did you go to the bank the night of the robbery, Daddy? Alice asked. To get some important papers I'd left there. I was working at home and needed them. He said he had interrupted the robbery and the gang took him along to keep him from identifying them. They're Westerners, he went on, and have used this cabin hideout before. The idea was to stay here for a cooling off period. How many are in the gang? Nancy asked. 3. At first, Shorty and Sid Bryce stayed in the cabin with me while Al Diamond lived in Tumbleweed and brought us supplies. Who's Sid Bryce, Uncle Ross? Beth asked. The gray-haired fellow who looks like me. He calls himself Bursey, Nancy told him. I know, said Mr. Rieger. One day, Al Diamond came to the cabin all excited. He talked to an Indian girl named Mary Dear and learned all about Valentine's treasure. So Diamond decided that the gang should go after it and sent Shorty to get a job on the ranch. He was supposed to spread the phantom horse story and drive the Raleighs off. Mr. Rigger, what happened to the bank loot? Nancy asked. It was hidden in the cabin until Sherry reported that you guys had spotted the place. The next day, Diamond and Bryce moved the money to the ghost town and made me go along. They had just finished hiding the loot in the old hotel when they heard your horses approaching. Bryce hustled me down the hill. All I could do was drop one of my crayons and hope somebody would find it. Oh, we did, Daddy, exclaimed Alice. Mr. Rieger and Diamond had remained in the ghost town to spy on the girls. Later, he told us he'd cost a rock slide. Nancy mentioned finding the coffee cups on the table in the cabin. Yes, we heard your horses clattering up the slope. So Bryce forced me out the window and back and into the little rocky passage. He had the dog on a rope and made him go too, but later he broke loose. We found one of your pictures on the table, Uncle Ross, said George. The man smiled. I've been drawing pictures to keep myself busy. Bryce has been telling them and keeping the money for himself, he added. Those terrible men. Have they mistreated you, Daddy? The bank president said he had not been hurt, but had been underfed and was weak. I once heard Bryce say there was time enough to get rid of me when they left Shadow Mountain. While Alice told her father all that had happened so far, Nancy, Beth, and George flagged their lights about Mr. Regal's prison. The floor was littered with pieces of broken pottery and rock. Beside the door, Nancy noticed a flat-topped boulder. The Indians probably used it for a table or a seat, she thought. Nearby was a large rectangular chunk of stone. The 3 girls switched off their lights and stepped outside. With Nancy in the lead, the 3 friends walked close to the whale of the hill and its settings. They searched one apartment after another for the treasure, but always found the same thing: shards and crumpled rocks. As the girls emerged from one of the middle rooms, Nancy noticed a crude wooden ladder resting against the wall and leaning towards the roof. It's just an old ladder, probably put there by the cliff dwellers, said Beth. As they neared the end of the row, the young sleuth exclaimed, "Look!" The last driveway was neatly blocked with an enormous stone. "Valentine's hideout," exclaimed George. "He must have put that rock there to keep intruders out." "But how did he get in?" Bess asked, puzzled. "The stone's too big to be moved much on this little ledge." "I know," Nancy exclaimed. "Come on." She hastened back to the ladder. Swiftly, she attached her flashlight to her belt and slipped her arms into her sweater. By the time George and Beth caught up to Nancy, she had begun to climb. Breathlessly, they watched her as she cautiously tested each rung. One splintered had before she finally reached the roof. "Nancy, be careful," Bess cried fearfully. Shading her flashlight, Nancy moved toward the end chamber and above a columnist of ancient footholds to the plateau above. "Probably there's another set like them on the other side," she reasoned. The latter was Valentine's extra music escape. Playing her flashlight over the surface, Nancy walked a dozen steps down towards the end of the roof. Suddenly, she spotted a large hole. Shining her light into it, Nancy saw a pile of broken rock directly below. She gripped the sides of the opening and lowered herself into the chamber. "Ooh, it's musty in here." In one corner lay by a moldering blanket and saddle. Nearby was pillocks. On the wall above these, Nancy found an indistinct carved letter file she brushed away in the dust. "Okay, so there's a letter for you. Huh? But do you get to get it or not?" Okay. In one corner by a smoldering blanket, in one corner lay a moldering blanket and saddle. Nearby was a pickaxe. On the wall above these, Nancy found an indistinct carved letter. She brushed away the dust. V, for Valentine. Nancy's pulse pounded with joy and excitement. But where was the treasure? It can't be buried, she thought. The floor is solid stone. When Nancy lifted the blanket, it fell into shreds at her touch. There was nothing beneath it. Her eyes fell upon a large pottery vase in the corner. The vessel was nearly 3 feet high and had a wide mouth. Nancy beamed her light into it. Standing on end and level with the top of the base was a metal box. This might be it, Nancy exulted. She put down her flashlight, reached in, and lifted out the heavy box. It slipped from her grasp and hit the floor, jolting off a rusted padlock. Nancy put Nancy pulled open the lid. Before her lay hundreds of small, shining gold hearts. Oh, beneath the layer of gold pieces lay stacks of United States banknotes and a bag. It contained an assortment of precious jewels. It can't be real, Nancy said aloud. I'm dreaming. But Nancy's mind clicked back to reality. I can't get this check back through the ceiling, that's for sure. She eyed the pickaxe. Maybe I can pry the rock away from the door. Nancy worked the point of the pickaxe beneath the rock. She pulled hard. The slab moved a trifle. She tried again. This time the rock moved about a foot. Nancy pushed the treasure box through the opening, turned off her flashlight, and squeezed inside. George, Bess! The girls came running, and Nancy told of her find. Take the treasure back to Alice and Mr. Rigger. I'll light the signal fire. Cautiously, Nancy crawled out onto the jutting rock and took a packet of matches from her pocket. She struck one, shielding it from the wind, and held it to the kindling. As the smoke rose, a gruff voice behind her suddenly barked, "Put out that fire." The voice was Al Diamond's. Nancy was trapped on the jutting rock, far above the valley. Stamp out that blaze, the man repeated sharply, or I'll knock you off of there. All right, Nancy's brain was in a whirl. She delayed until Diamond bellowed again. Then she kicked the pile of smoldering wood from the rock. It burst into a shower of sparks and flame on the way down. Diamond snarled, "Come here." When Nancy made her way back to the cliff, he said gloatingly, "You think you're smart. As for those phony treasure hunters, we cut out of that trap when I spotted the sheriff trading us." Nancy's spirit sank as Al continued to storm. You've made it too hot for us here, and you'll pay for it. He said the gang was on its way to the ghost town to pick up the bank loot when they stopped at the cabin. Shorty found fresh horse tracks and figured the girls had a line on the treasure. He saw you gathering wood and gave us his coyote signal. Nancy's captor bragged that he and his partners had hurried to the top of the steps and watched from above. Seeing the girls emerging from Rieger's prison, the three men had sneaked down into one of the cliff dwelling rooms to spy on them. Finally, we saw you hurry by, and then your friend showed up carrying something heavy. I said to myself, there goes the treasure. How nice to have Nancy Drew do all the work for us. You didn't harm Bess and George, Nancy said hotly. Oh, no, came the sarcastic reply. My boys let him get to Rieger's prison. Then they closed in. Nancy fumbled for her flashlight and switched it on. Turn that off. I don't want anybody getting nosy. Hurry up. Get going. Nancy hoped desperately that Dave had seen the signal fire. In order to give him time to make the treacherous ascent, Nancy hugged the wall and moved as slowly as possible. Oops. As slowly as possible. Step on it, Diamond barked. Finally, he pushed her into the prison room. In one corner, she saw the red glow of a flashlight shaded by a cloth, and near it, the dark figures of two men. But she could see nothing else in the room. We're okay, Nancy, came George's voice. They made us sit on the floor and smashed our flashlights, said Bess. Diamond spoke up sharply. Shorty, where's the treasure? Can't see it, boss. You told me to keep the light covered. Diamond fumbled about before giving an exclamation of disgust. Rigger, are you hiding it? Let my father alone, Alice cried out. He doesn't have anything. Instantly, Nancy's foot reached for the large chunk of stone she had seen near the door. Quickly, she shrugged her sweater from her shoulders and it dropped over the stone. All right, Mr. Diamond, here it is. As she spoke, Nancy stooped and gathered the rock into her sweater. I'll take it. No, you won't. With a mighty lunge, Nancy hurled the stone through the door and over the side of the cliff. Seconds later, it crashed on the rocks below. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Then Diamond exploded. You've played your last trick on me, Nancy Drew. Bryce, Shorty, tie him up. Nancy sat on the stone bench beside the door and waited coolly while Shorty lashed her ankles together. Diamond said, Bryce, you and I'll go down to the valley and find the treasure. Shorty, guard these girls till you get my signal. At this, Nancy chuckled. Poor Shorty, by the time you reach the valley, your pals and the treasure will be gone. The cowboy stopped his tying and turned to Diamond. Let Bryce stay. I'm through sticking my neck out. Yes, Nancy declared. Suspicion was on you from the beginning. You wrecked the pump and cut the telephone wire. All right, Shorty said resentfully. And I put the generator out of whack and pulled the nettle trick. Shut up, Diamond ordered. George spoke up. They kept you busy, Shorty, after you imitated poor Chief. You found the clue in Nancy's watch and later stole the green liniment bottle. Out of darkness came Bess's voice. Who ransacked our room? Bryce, replied Shorty. That's about all he did. Is that so? Diamond spluttered angrily. Without my brains, you'd both be nowhere. What do you mean? Bryce interrupted. I cut the fences and knocked down the windmill. Now the men's voices shrilled in anger as each claimed importance for his part in the conspiracy. Diamond's voice rose with fury. Listen, he raged. I got the idea for the phantom horse. I bought the silk and paint and trained the stallion to come to my whistle. We helped you, Shorty retorted. He reminded Diamond that he and Bryce had put the trappings on the stallion for the phantom performance. Ross Rigger cut in. You almost caught them at it one night, Nancy. Scared them so badly they called off the phantom. I heard Bryce say he had to slip from the spring house into the cellar through the secret opening. Quit wasting time, Diamond shrieked. We got to get clear out of here. Now take it easy, Diamond, Shorty said with a ring of authority. It's me and Bryce again, you. And we'll go for the treasure. You stay here. Diamond fumed. Okay, but don't try any funny business and come right back. Without a word, the other two men went out the door, taking the light with them. The captives heard Diamond make his way through the darkness to the back of the chamber, then heard the creak of a hinge. A soft laugh came from the gang leader. In case you're wondering, I'm opening a wooden box where we keep dynamite and fuses. Gasps came from the prisoners. You can't do that, George cried out. I'm forced to. Ross Rigger knows too much and I can't afford to let him go. Too bad, Nancy Drew, that you butted into my affairs. I'll say, Mr. Rigger called out, but don't harm these girls. No, and as soon as I light the fuse, I'll lamb out of here. Crack! A match flared in Diamond's hand. Wait, Nancy explained. You'll blow up the treasure. The match hovered in midair. What? That was just a big stone I threw over the cliff, Nancy admitted. She turned on her flashlight and swept it about the room, making certain the beam hit the entrance several times. Someone just might notice it. Here, give me that. Diamond snatched the light. Now, where's the thing you girls carried? Here, said Bess. We're sitting on it. Diamond pushed her and George aside and flipped open the chest. Good night. He grabbed a handful of the gold hearts and let them run through his fingers. Then he closed the lid and began to carry the box towards the entrance. Just then, the rattle of falling stones came from below. Flushed with success, Diamond called out, Shorty, Bryce, I have the treasure. Fellows, we're rich. Voices. Then a light flashed into the room. Hold it, Diamond. Dave, Nancy cried out. Diamond made a break for freedom, but George put out her foot, and the criminal fell into the strong arms of Sheriff Curtis. Handcuffs clicked shut. The girls and Mr. Rieger gave shouts of joy at the sight of Dave, the sheriff, his deputy, and Mr. Raleigh. As the captives were untied, Ross Rigger told how cleverly Nancy had played for time. Dave smiled. She's the smartest little tenderfoot I ever saw. Then he related how the decoys and the sheriff's party had lost the gang and gone back to Shadow Ranch. When we saw the fire falling, I figured something like this had happened, Mr. Raleigh said. We didn't want to give ourselves away, so we drove up the valley with our lights off. Dave added that Bryce and Shorty had been caught on the way down. But where's the treasure? Here, George grinned. Half an hour later, the party reached the valley floor just as the moon rose. Dave put Valentine's fortune in the ranch wagon, while Nancy gave Sheriff Curtis a brief report. It was agreed that he would recover the stolen bank money from the Ghost Town Hotel in the morning, and the cowboys were to bring the girls horses and the Phantom. The sullen prisoners were driven off in the sheriff's car. As Dave headed the ranch wagon down the valley, he said he thought Nancy should have a share of the treasure. I know the gold must be turned over to the state, Dave added, But the jewels and banknotes should be worth a good sum. Nancy, since you found them, I feel a share rightfully belongs to you. The young detective smiled, then graciously but firmly declined to accept any part of the find. It was fun, she said. The grateful cowboy grinned. My brother and sister sure will be excited by the news. A little later, they turned into the gate. The ranch, bathed in silvery moonlight, looked peaceful. Alice squeezed her father's hand. Everything has turned out happily. Thanks to Nancy Drew, Mr. Rieger smiled. What are you going to do now, Nancy, without a mystery to solve? Bess teased. Her friend smiled. Work on the sweater I'm knitting for Dad. She did not know then that soon she would become involved in the secret of Redgate Farm. But George knew that Nancy and Mystery were never far apart. She gave a sigh of mock sadness. I hope your dad doesn't need that answer very soon. The end. We did it. We read the rest of the book tonight. All right. So I should be starting another Nancy Drew book, maybe in a couple weeks. Have some other things going on at the moment. So thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you um, enjoyed the story and are looking forward to more. If you want to keep up with me, please visit my YouTube channel, Sharon Schultz, the Bay Lady. Also follow me on Facebook, the Bay Lady. And you'll note on my platforms a link to buy me a coffee. That is the platform where I can accept tips, gratuities, what have you, to use for future tours. Anyway, so thank you very much, and I'll say good night now. Good night.